My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, echoing through the grand hall where the wedding was already in full swing. I adjusted the silk of my emerald green dress, feeling it hug me in all the right places, and smoothed down a stray strand of hair that refused to cooperate. The scent of roses and polished wood filled the air, but I barely noticed it. My eyes were fixed on the crowd, scanning for the one person whose opinion had haunted me for years, my brother. I wasn't supposed to be here. Or maybe I wasn't supposed to feel this way. For so long, I had been the family embarrassment, whispered about at every gathering, my choices ridiculed, my ambitions dismissed. And now, here I was, respected, accomplished, yet entirely unseen beneath the glittering surface of this wedding. My phone vibrated in my clutch. A single message from my mother. Try to be nice. Don't cause a scene. I exhaled sharply, a mixture of frustration and ironic amusement curling in my chest. Nice? After everything? My heart thumped, remembering the sting of his words the last time he openly humiliated me in front of the family. I let my gaze wander to the bride, the laughter, the champagne flutes glinting in the soft lighting. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had called me a disgrace, yet here I was, quietly conquering my world while he prepared to celebrate his perfect day. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't just here to watch. Something was about to shift. I still remember that night like it was yesterday, though I was barely 22. My dorm room smelled faintly of old textbooks and lavender, and the glow of my desk lamp highlighted the tear tracks I tried so desperately to hide. I had just come home for a weekend visit, excited to share my acceptance into a prestigious design program, and instead, he laughed. "Olivia, you really think this matters?" My brother, Jason, had sneered, tossing my acceptance letter onto the couch. "You've always been a joke in this family. Why start now?" The words struck me harder than any slap ever could. My hands trembled, and I clutched my favorite bracelet, my grandmother's gift from her own youth, delicate gold with a tiny sapphire charm. She had always whispered, "Believe in yourself, Olivia. The world will notice if you do." But hearing him, feeling the weight of my family's scorn, made that promise feel fragile, almost laughable. I wanted to scream, to storm out, to make him see me. But instead, I curled into a corner of the couch, the knot in my throat tightening. My mother sighed from the kitchen, not wanting to intervene, and my father just shook his head as if my failure was inevitable. I had been dismissed, again and again, and the sting of rejection burned sharper than any physical pain I'd known. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't prove him right by staying small. I wouldn't let their judgments define me. I traced the sapphire on my wrist and whispered to myself, "I'll show them what I can do, but on my terms." By morning, I had already started sketching plans for a life far away from their constant critiques. I researched opportunities, applied for internships, and mapped out the route that would eventually lead me out of their shadows. Every pang of humiliation became fuel. Every whispered failure became a reminder that I had to rise, silently but resolutely. It wasn't easy. I stumbled, I doubted, I cried alone in my tiny apartment at night. But somewhere in those quiet hours, Olivia Bennett, the woman who refused to be defined by ridicule, was born. I left my hometown the day after graduation, suitcase in hand, and a heart full of determination. The city was overwhelming. Its noise, its crowded streets, its endless possibilities, but it smelled like opportunity. I had no safety net, no family support, just the quiet encouragement of my grandmother's sapphire bracelet wrapped around my wrist. Every time I felt doubt creeping in, I would touch it and remember her words. "Believe in yourself, Olivia. The world will notice if you do." I found a tiny apartment in a neighborhood that smelled faintly of coffee and old brick buildings, the kind of place where dreams either took root or withered away. I worked odd jobs during the day and spent nights learning everything I could about design, entrepreneurship, and branding. It was exhausting, my hands cramped from sketching for hours, my eyes red from staring at screens late into the night. But I loved every second. Every small victory felt monumental, The first time a client actually paid me, the first time someone complimented a piece I had designed, the first time I realized I could survive and thrive without their approval. Then I met Marlene, a seasoned designer in the city, who saw more in me than I saw in myself. "You're raw talent, Olivia," she said one rainy afternoon, handing me a cup of coffee and reviewing my sketches. "But raw talent isn't enough. You need strategy, patience, and the guts to fight for what's yours. Do you have that?" I nodded, my hands trembling slightly. I wanted to say yes loudly, fiercely, but instead I whispered it to myself, "I do." The learning curve was brutal. I faced clients who doubted me because of my age, nights when my apartment was so quiet I could hear my own insecurities shouting back at me, moments when I questioned if all the pain had been worth it. But step by step, I carved my path. I launched my first freelance project, a small branding campaign for a local cafe. It was modest but profitable, and for the first time, I felt the intoxicating thrill of control over my own life. Over the next few years, the work expanded. A boutique agency noticed my designs, then a bigger client, then another, each project a testament to my relentless dedication. I never posted updates online. My Instagram remained personal, my LinkedIn sparse, just enough to avoid suspicion from my family. They thought I was still finding myself, still struggling like always, and I let them. I had learned the power of invisibility. Sometimes, it's easier to surprise the world with quiet victories than to fight for validation from those who never gave it. By the time I received the invitation to Jason's wedding, I had a flourishing design studio, a small but loyal team, and clients who trusted me with their most important projects. My bank account had numbers my younger self could only dream of, and I owned more than just success. I owned my independence. Yet, standing outside the grand hall, adjusting my emerald green dress, I realized that none of it would matter if I didn't finally confront the person who had once called me the family embarrassment. I touched my bracelet, feeling the smooth sapphire, and reminded myself I was ready. The hall was a swirl of white gowns, crisp tuxedos, and sparkling lights. Music floated through the air, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. I paused just inside the entrance, taking it all in, the extravagant floral arrangements, the glimmering chandeliers, the perfectly polished tables. Jason's eyes met mine across the room, a flicker of surprise in them, but he quickly masked it with a polite smile. He expected me to be timid, to linger at the edge, to remain the quiet, inconsequential sibling. He couldn't have been more wrong. I walked in with deliberate calm, heels clicking softly, my emerald dress flowing like water around me. People glanced, whispered, shifted. I could feel their curiosity before they even spoke. Why was Olivia Bennett here, looking radiant, composed, in control? Then I saw her, Rachel, the best woman, standing by Jason with her effortless poise and warm smile. She leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "You're ready, aren't you?" I nodded. We shared a knowing look, a silent pact. This moment wasn't about shame, revenge, or spectacle. It was about truth. I let my eyes sweep over the room, pausing on my parents. My mother's eyebrows shot up, a flash of worry, perhaps guilt. My father looked slightly flushed, caught between pride and disbelief. And Jason looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. The little sister who never did anything was standing taller than anyone else in that room. "May I have a word?" I said to Rachel, who smiled and gave me a subtle nod. She stepped aside, letting me pass through a circle of curious onlookers until I stood directly in front of my brother. Silence settled, thick and heavy, as I finally spoke. "Jason," I began, my voice calm but carrying the weight of years. "I'm not the person you once called the family embarrassment. I own a successful design studio. I have clients you've heard of but would never have imagined me working with. I live independently, and I thrive without anyone's validation." I let that sink in. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. I could see the recognition dawn in my parents' eyes, the subtle guilt flash across Jason's face, the disbelief in the whispers around me. "And just in case you're wondering," I continued, a slight smile playing on my lips. My net worth allows me to live wherever I choose, however I choose. I've built everything on my own, with only my talent, determination, and a little guidance from people who actually believed in me. Jason's jaw tightened. My mother clutched her clutch a little too tightly. My father's face softened, a mixture of pride and remorse. I felt no need to explain more. The truth spoke louder than any words could. For the first time, I saw them truly see me, not as a disappointment, but as the woman I had become. The room had gone silent after my declaration, the air thick with a mixture of awe, guilt, and disbelief. I looked at my family, my parents, my brother Jason, even the cousins who had whispered behind my back for years, and I realized for the first time that I held the upper hand. Not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because I finally understood my own worth. I took a slow breath, letting my gaze settle on Jason first. "I want you to listen carefully," I said, each word deliberate, measured. "I can help you, support you, even share my knowledge, but only if things change. I will not participate in old patterns, the criticism, the dismissals, the casual cruelty. If you want to be part of my life, here are the conditions." Jason swallowed hard, but I could see him listening, really listening. "First," I continued, "respect. That means acknowledging my achievements without comparison or condescension. You cannot belittle me, nor speak over me. Second, accountability. Your choices, your responsibilities, your mistakes, you own them. I will no longer carry the weight of your insecurities. Third, growth. Pursue your passions honestly, without dragging me or anyone else into proving your worth." I turned to my parents, whose eyes had softened but still held traces of old habits. "Mom, Dad, I love you, but you can't continue the same patterns of judgment. Support me for who I am, not who you wished I would be. Encourage each other and encourage yourselves, but don't expect me to bend backward to compensate for decades of misunderstanding." There were murmurs of compliance, tentative nods. I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. Power didn't feel like vengeance, it felt like clarity. Compassion, when paired with firm boundaries, can be unstoppable. Finally, I addressed the extended family who had doubted me silently for years. "If you want to be part of my life, you need to act with respect and authenticity. No gossip, no undermining. Anyone who can't manage that well, they won't have the privilege of my time or attention." A hush fell over the room. Even Rachel, the best woman, gave me an approving nod, recognizing the calm authority I now carried. I had set the terms, not in anger, but in strength. Every condition I laid down was tied to emotional healing, for me, for them, and for the relationships we still had the potential to nurture. I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. No longer would I carry the family embarrassment label, silently or publicly. I had given them a chance, clearly and firmly, to meet me where I stood. And now, for the first time, I realized that the future was entirely mine to define. Weeks later, the wedding was a memory, but its echoes lingered. Jason had called me hesitant, awkward, but sincere. "Olivia, I'm sorry," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. For the first time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I listened, noting the subtle changes in his tone, the absence of defensiveness. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. My parents reached out, too, their messages tinged with humility and admiration. They asked questions, not to judge, but to understand. I realized then that the power I had gained wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I deserved respect, love, and a voice in my own life. I sat in my apartment one evening, the city lights reflecting off my windows. My grandmother's bracelet rested on my wrist, the sapphire catching the light just so. I turned it over between my fingers and smiled softly, remembering her words. "Believe in yourself, Olivia. The world will notice if you do." The world had noticed. And more importantly, I had noticed me. Small changes rippled through our family. Jason pursued a new career path with more focus, admitting when he needed help instead of hiding behind sarcasm. My parents took up volunteering, spending more time nurturing rather than critiquing. Even the cousins who had once dismissed me began asking for advice, listening rather than laughing. I felt the satisfaction that comes from quiet victory, the kind that doesn't boast but quietly reshapes lives. I was no longer the family embarrassment. I was the woman who had endured, fought, and emerged stronger, independent, and at peace. I sipped my coffee, watching the morning sun filter through the blinds, feeling a deep sense of calm. Life hadn't erased the pain, but it had transformed it into power. And as I traced the sapphire on my wrist one last time, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, I am enough. I always was.